these two men are very close friends, but their backgrounds make that seem impossible. 91-year-old Irving Roth is a Holocaust survivor who barely made it out of the Buchenwald concentration camp. And 36-year-old Qasim Hafiz is a former radical Islamist of Pakistani descent who was raised learning to hate the Jewish people. Yet somehow they've become best buddies, and their story has now been captured in a new documentary called Never Again. Well, we're pleased to welcome one of the two stars of this documentary, Qasim Hafiz himself. So first of all, Qasim, tell us a bit about your journey from being taught that Jews were the enemy to then visiting Israel numerous times and striking up a friendship with Irving Roth. I mean, what made you change your views so much?
So ultimately, when I was at my most radical and extreme, so I'd grown up with anti-Semitic messages throughout my life. By the time I was at college, I was at the point where I thought violence was the only way, that I need to commit essentially an act of terrorism. So I'm looking at ways to join a terrorist group in Pakistan, and I come across the case for Israel. I had never read anything which even looked at the other side. I just listened to everything in my own echo chamber, which was incredibly anti-Semitic. And that set off this journey to get to the truth. Basically, I wanted to reaffirm what I believed because it was being challenged. That then led to me going to Israel almost 2 years later. And then I went to Israel and saw the reality. And it was so far removed from everything I had been taught and brought up with that when I came back to the UK, I wanted to speak out against all of this demonization of Israel that I had taken part in, that I had been brainwashed with. And then that eventually, once I moved to North America, I started working with and then for Christians United for Israel. And that's where I met Irving. And, I met Irving at a point where I was struggling because I'd left the UK because of death threats and difficulties with my family, and was thinking about leaving advocacy or speaking out for Israel behind. I met Irving, and he's such an incredible human being. And here I am years later, still speaking out.
Well, Irving, I saw this when I was reading about you, that he has a tattoo on his arm from the time that he was in the concentration camp, something that you yourself actually tattooed on your arm as well to stand in solidarity with him. I mean, tell me about your relationship and the connection and basically, how he's influenced you.
So for me, meeting Irving for the first time and how full of life he is and his just energy and all these things. And then you look at what he's endured. Firstly, that was incredibly inspiring. But secondly, Irving is so passionate about speaking out against anti-Semitism and in support of Israel because he has seen firsthand what happens when the Jewish people are weak, when the Jewish people don't have a place to defend themselves, a place to call home. And that, for me, really reaffirmed the importance of speaking out and why it was necessary and why, speaking out against anti-Semitism and for Israel isn't a Jewish issue, it is a human issue. And Irving really, for me, has been an inspiration. And I would definitely credit the last 5-6 years of my life, the dedication, working for Christians United for Israel, the travel all over the country, speaking out in support at campuses, at churches, have hugely been because of him.
It's interesting. You mentioned that your family obviously did not take well to you kind of changing your entire worldview. Can you talk to us about what that experience was like, kind of being this person who's raised in this Jew-hating atmosphere to then saying, I'm going to become an advocate for the state of Israel?
Yeah, so when I came back from Israel, I didn't think I was doing anything controversial. I honestly call it naivety, thought this is what I experienced and now I'm sharing. And it was met with hostility because, like I had my echo chamber, and that was my reality. Because I'd heard it from a young age, that was the truth no matter what I was hearing. So it started off firstly with almost kind of rejection, and then it became more hostile. And it wasn't just my family, it was my family, it was the community at large, my friends, because it was such a tight-knit community. So very quickly I find myself not only on the outside, but also the target of a lot of hostility and hatred.
So, I mean, you obviously have a lot of lessons to teach about how you overcome that type of feedback from the people who love you the most. But, why do you think that people should watch this documentary about your story and your relationship, of course, with this Holocaust survivor, Irving Roth?
There are numerous reasons. Firstly, I think Irving's story is so important because we look at the Holocaust as something so far removed. And in America, anti Semitism is at the highest rate it's been since statistics are recorded. So I think it's important to see where hatred leads, especially with this idea that I grew up in the UK. I grew up in the West. I went to British state schools, yet I was radicalized to the point of wanting to commit acts of violence. So we have to remember that words, Irving always said it starts with words. And we have to really look at that and see where it leads, what it has done. And ultimately, the message of the film is love over hate. And once we start seeing people as people and don't keep looking at the differences or looking at them as the other, we can really make progress as a society in our communities and our countries.
Well, listen, I mean, your story is just such an inspiring one. I can't wait to see this documentary myself. Kasim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.